Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another Auntie Open Webinar, actually our last one for the year. Our topic for today will be workplace performance, presenteeism, and quiet quitting. And our professional for today's topic will be Hanna-Kaisa Raninen. I'll give you a few moments to come online, and while we do so, I want to remind you that your microphones are on mute. So if you want to take part and share your thoughts and ideas, you are free to do so in the chat function. And if you want to leave any questions about the topic for our professional that we'll tackle in the end, please do so by using the Q&A section, and we will tackle whatever questions might arise at the end of this session. Hey, that being said, this will be our last open webinar for this year, and we will continue, of course, with new topics on the next year. But being mindful of the time, I think it's time to let our professional take the stage. So Hanna-Kaisa, the stage is yours, and let's tune in and listen to today's topic. Take it away.
Thank you, Mikael, and welcome everybody to the webinar about presenteeism and quiet quitting. And shortly before going into the webinar topic and agenda for today, I'm just going to present myself as a speaker today. So I work as an Auntie-professional, mostly with our leader packages, with stress management, executive coaching. My background is in business and sport and exercise psychology. So working with human performance is kind of my deal. And our agenda for today is going to be kind of a systemic overview and organizational perspective to the phenomenon of presenteeism and quiet quitting. So firstly, we'll be exploring these phenomena in detail, kind of where they come from, what do we know about them from research and literature. Then shortly recognizing the signs at the workplace. So as I said, the perspective today is kind of an organizational rather than an individual perspective on this topic. Then going through maybe the most important thing, so the preventative measures, how to look out for the signs, how to prevent these in organizational culture. And as already said, then at the end, if you have any best practices you want to share, any ideas, notions that come about from listening to today's presentation, so please feel free to share and we'll go over them at the end. But going into kind of looking at the concepts we are delving into today. So what are we really talking about when we are talking about presenteeism and quiet quitting? So presenteeism is basically working while sick and being kind of unable to fully engage, kind of not being fully cognitively capable of doing the job. And when we are looking at research literature on the topic, we know that presenteeism is described as a pretty large, kind of vast concept that also contains not only flu or that type of sickness, but also mental health issues, chronic illnesses, and those types of things. But maybe, of course, in everyday language, when we are talking about somebody coming to work sick, we are talking about the common flu or those type of symptoms. And then quiet quitting, which is quite a trendy concept in some ways, has been emerging for a while. That means that somebody at work is kind of not choosing to go above and beyond at work. So there is kind of this workplace disconnection. They feel that they are not maybe as committed to the workplace and its values than maybe at some earlier time was the case. So quiet quitting as a term comes from the United States, where there was a Gallup research a few years ago during the pandemic or after pandemic. And in the American landscape, they found that around 50% of people were quietly quitting. So I want to stress that this was the American work life. And what we know about quiet quitting, that it seems to thrive in these environments such as the United States, where the hierarchy at the workplace is pretty high. And the workplace culture is reliant on a lot of overtime, very short holidays, and so on. So during the pandemic, people kind of were looking at their values, looking at what their life is about. Is it only working? Do I need to all the time be just doing things, or would I be able to maybe engage in a better work-life balance? And quiet quitting seems to be kind of a phenomenon that grew out of the pandemic and this re-evaluation of values in one's life. Quiet quitting here, we'll look into it a little bit later as well. There are some healthy aspects in it as well, looking at boundaries at work, looking at how you're able to recover from work better. What's kind of negative about it when we look at the research is that the person who is quietly quitting is not then contributing to the workplace culture, organizational culture, or teamwork, maybe in a similar manner. So now looking at the reasons for quiet quitting first. So we know that people kind of, if they're feeling stuck at work or underappreciated, so they have maybe been trying to go forward, get those development opportunities, kind of give feedback and talk about some issues that they may have with their workload, for instance, or their motivation or the tasks at hand, but kind of feel unheard for a long time. So quiet quitting, according to research, is kind of the last resort of things. So when nothing works anymore, so then I kind of don't engage anymore in a similar manner and only do the absolute minimum that my work contract requires. And what's important to understand, and now if we're looking at this from a Nordic perspective, we can maybe think about that these are things that we know from research from pretty much from the US culture. So kind of maybe these are some lessons or learnings that we can then derive into the Nordic way of working as well, if you're in the Nordics listening. But what is important to understand about quiet quitting is that it's a coping mechanism many times for either being burned out or close to burnout or being bored out. So not having those opportunities to grow, professionally develop yourself. So this is very important in this phenomenon. Or then kind of being so overburdened for such a long time, kind of trying to maybe figure out a way to deal with this workload, but kind of not finding the solutions with the organization, or maybe the management is not kind of helping you enough in that sense. So a coping mechanism for that. So kind of isolating yourself from the culture is then the only solution the employee has left. It can also be a reaction to a toxic work environment. So kind of that there is somehow bad management, or the person is feeling that they have to endure ethical stress, so that there are some values that they cannot kind of underwrite or live by. So they kind of shield themselves from this environment by not engaging as much with the organization anymore. And what kind of was clear to me looking at the research from this as well, kind of that there are these psychological basic needs, some from self-determination theory, that are not met. So at the workplace, we know that the person should feel autonomy, so control over their own work and how they maybe develop themselves professionally. They should also feel that they have the right competencies, they can develop them and use them on a daily basis so that their work feels meaningful, and that they are listened to, their feedback is taken seriously, and they can see that they are accepted and respected in the workplace as well. So if these are not met, we know that work motivation will go down. And here is maybe another perspective on the phenomenon of quiet quitting. So is it quiet quitting, or just kind of maybe a step toward a healthier work culture called calibrated contributing, according to some researchers? So here maybe the employee is looking at the investment and the return. So kind of balancing the scales a little bit as in the picture here. So people maybe have kind of this intuitive internal scale that I invest in my work equally as I get in return. And if they feel that this is not in balance, so then rather than calling it quiet quitting, it could also be called calibrated contributing. So they just contribute as much as they get in return. Of course, it would be more beneficial if this wouldn't be done quietly, but this would be done together with the organization to look at the workload, for instance. And kind of not overperforming. So putting some boundaries in, just doing what my contract requires of me, eliminating maybe some extra stuff that has come my way. But again, maybe this could be better done together. And kind of not confusing quiet quitting with setting healthy boundaries, investing in recovery. This, of course, for the organization as well in the long run is better, and for the employee, for the individual and their health is very beneficial to look at these healthy boundaries. So you can stay, and one can stay capable of working many years to come. Well, presenteeism then, so working while sick. So we're going to look at systemic factors here a little bit, and what kind of make it so that person would then go to work as sick. So of course, very evident, self-evident, if you lose pay when you are home on sick leave, so then kind of the incentive to go to work sick increases. An economy where jobs are hard to find, or kind of lack of job security, you have a fear of losing your job. So then, of course, you would rather go to work, get that pay, so you can pay for your expenses and food and housing and so on. Gig economy, so working freelance, being owning your own maybe little company, indefinite work contracts. So everything where like there is no kind of job security, maybe there is no health care that is paid for you. So then if you have your own company, for instance, and you have a gig coming up, which then maybe constitutes a significant amount of your money for that month, so then of course you will much rather go and do the job as sick as well. Heavy workload, and we also know that these very kind of heavy performance related incentives also kind of make the person go to work because they know that this will then affect in the future their incentives, their maybe pay or their professional development opportunities. And this is something that I also see in my client work, that kind of boundaries are much harder to set when people know that they feel that this maybe affects my kind of evaluation at the end of the year, that then dictates my pay for the next year, or how I'm perceived at the workplace. Or if there is kind of lack of support, or you're not able to delegate to anybody, or if you stay home while sick and you know that then other people have to do your work and the work piles up, so then you would much rather go and just do it. And lack of psychological safety means that there are no kind of common principles in place, maybe at the workplace, that we have agreed on. How do we as a team, for instance, work in these cases when somebody is sick? How do we delegate things? Is it okay for me to show that I'm not fully capable now in doing my job? Is there kind of a preventative measures in place? What type of culture is there around the topic as well? And also from the literature, we know that usually there are some kind of motivated people in senior positions who are very eager to do their job, who are very committed to the company as well. And people usually that have leadership responsibility are more likely to stay to come to the workplace while sick as well, because they feel the burden of responsibility as well, that if they stay at home, then kind of the job doesn't get done. And this is something that I also deal with my clients many times with leaders, that they have this accentuated responsibility, and then we have to really talk about if this is something that is sustainable in the long run, or if they also would deserve to stay at home and kind of in the long run then feel better and have that recovery period. But this is of course related to organizational culture as well, and they're in a very peculiar or very particular position as well, because of course people who have leadership responsibility are more prone to this phenomenon, but they are also kind of the example for their team of how and what type of culture we build. But usually people in leadership positions are also kind of between a rock and a hard place, in a sense that they have many responsibilities for the health of their team, for the effectiveness of their team, and then, of course, the results for the larger organization, monetary responsibilities, and so on. Just going to put this all here for now. So, of course, why should we then care about this phenomenon? So why are they important? So we now have been going over what they are and what the symptoms are. But what are the consequences for organizations here specifically? Of course, there are consequences for the individual for sure as well. With going to work when sick, performance issues, so kind of not being able to fully do the work at full capacity. Of course, here it's important to remember that none of us are always at work at full capacity, even though we wouldn't be visibly sick in any way. So there will be these ebbs and flows in everybody's working capabilities, and that's of course something that is very natural. And not always working while, let's say, with a chronic illness is something that would deteriorate your performance in the long run or lead to more dire consequences in the long run. Working and being with a community that you respect and people that you like at work and doing meaningful things. So that, of course, will add to one's recovery as well. But just as a general statement, we know that in the long run, there will be kind of increased sickness and burnout rates if this issue is not tackled. Healthcare costs for the society as well. Then safety of others, of course, is impacted, and team dynamics. So this is something that I see in my client work as well, a very hard topic. Somebody is coming always kind of not in full capacity, and how that affects others' work and others' safety is an issue. Hero culture here is more of the idea that, we should always be able to work. Even when we're sick, we will come to the office, and this builds up organizational culture that is not very healthy. So kind of the message is then that rest is for the lazy people, or this type of culture, if it's not looked after or prevented or talked about. Then quiet quitting, of course, for the organization, then there are many consequences, such as when it's quiet, then difficulty then kind of seeing the underlying issues and correct them, and kind of correct course as well. So that's why these open communication channels are very important. Then if the person is not anymore so committed to the organization, committed to the team effort, is kind of isolating a little bit. So there will be an impact on effective team dynamics, effective team functioning. Maybe the person is not taking new challenges on anymore, and which is very natural, of course, if they're in the brink of burnout and this is their coping mechanism for it. So then, of course, we are losing creativity, innovation, new problem solving ways. And then, of course, talent may leave the organization as well, and kind of look for other opportunities. But looking at the signs for both of these phenomena here. So, of course, this is not an exhaustive list in any way. I'm just going to put it all in here. But if kind of noticing that there is absenteeism, so people aren't showing up, and there are a lot of sick leaves as well. Maybe a team member is isolating, kind of withdrawing from team efforts or community efforts. Not coming to team meetings anymore, for instance, is something, of course, then there should be some principles in place of how we expect people to participate, what are kind of things that we would all be present, and so on and so on. And here I think also remote working is an issue with presenteeism as well. It's easy to hide kind of behind screens if there is not consistent communication between, let's say, manager and team member. And then, of course, performance decline in a way that you're not able to hold on to deadlines anymore. There's inconsistency in work quality in some way as well, kind of showing maybe the signs that you are not working at full capacity. And this kind of course, requires that the team manager, whoever is kind of in charge of things in that way, knows their employees, knows their team members, and kind of knows their personality, how they usually behave and do their work, and kind of then pretty early on tackles these issues when they come, and kind of starts a conversation about maybe what is going on. And at the end here, you can recognize maybe that many of these things are also signs of overload, which is very important to remember. And here, preventative early measures are important. So changes in behavior somewhat, kind of being irritable, negative, not wanting to participate anymore with team meetings, being very short in their answers and so on is already a sign to maybe start a conversation. Well, then into preventative measures for a third part of this webinar before we get into your questions. So this is, of course, a very broad look at it from an organizational perspective. What we know from research literature is that at least these three things are very important. So prioritizing mental health, promoting a good work-life balance, and kind of communicating this and having expectations of this, and also having measures in place on how to track this within the organization, taking feedback and then acting accordingly. And here in the center is kind of the very, very key thing here. So fostering open communication channels. So having feedback channels, managers discussing with their team members on a very regular basis. That is something that people know and can expect. So from the very first day of working, this is something that everybody knows that will happen on a weekly basis. We'll have a little talk. And then here, investing in psychological safety. So psychological safety is kind of this idea that teams work effectively when they feel safe, and kind of there are many aspects here of that, but kind of feeling that you are appreciated, you can use your competencies, people appreciate your work, and you as a person, you can be who you are. But here, most importantly, of course, that there are channels for feedback. You are not afraid to give feedback. It's kind of welcomed with open arms, and something is also done about it. So then that, of course, fosters trust, which is important. And let's say in quiet quitting, for sure, trust has been deteriorating for some time. And then looking at both of these phenomena individually, so with presenteeism, kind of at least these three things are very important. So eliminating praise for overextending, so kind of rewarding for something, for healthy behavior. Many times I hear stories in my client work as well that people are being very flexible and doing an extra amount of work, and kind of they're already overextending themselves and feeling kind of the overload, and then they get very good feedback of you were so flexible in this. And this is somewhat problematic, as it gives the signaling that this is the amount of work and kind of the amount of dedication in that sense that one has to give to get that good feedback. And values aligned with actions here just means that kind of the organizational values are lived true. Here is just kind of an example of my recent client work, where a client told me that they have a very, very good boss who always says that you have to stop working at 6 and please go home, don't stay at the office, I don't want to see you here, which is very wonderful, and kind of taking care of the employees' boundaries in that way that they are not overworking themselves. But then at the same time, in the evening, they send a very late email where they expect a report for the next morning. So there are some values, but actions are not aligned. So it's a very complicated situation for the employee to know what are the expectations here that I should live by. And kind of there we go into our second. So modeling healthy behaviors, having these clear team principles and expectations for how do we, when we are sick, what are the principles? How do we work? How do other people kind of remind the team member of these principles? When do we talk about these things as well? And how the manager is then, of course, in a very important position here to then prevent and talk about these things with the team members. And support, so kind of open communication channels, talking about this early, but then of course having professional help, healthcare, there to help with these discussions, and if anything more serious comes up, so then referring of course forward. And then at the organizational level, communicating the risks of this behavior for the individual as well. So we know that it kind of leads to, as a larger phenomenon, to longer sick leaves or lessened work capabilities. And then with quiet quitting, so here the managerial responsibility comes into play. So having regular check-ins with team members, so seems pretty self-evident, but kind of according to research here, 15 minutes every week, meaningful discussion with a team member seems to be enough to kind of elicit trust and feel that there is open communication and so on. And of course, from a manager, it requires that they want to understand the individual needs and motivations of their employees, understand that these are differing and may differ in different times as well. So kind of being on track of what is happening and having a pretty coaching attitude. So what can I do? I'm here to help type of attitude rather than an authoritative boss attitude. And enhancing recovery, so having regular communication when these check-ins happen about work role and tasks and individual motivation. And then, of course, we know that flexibility arrangements, remote work, holidays, all that type of things, people have different life situations that the organization is maybe with you, ready to be flexible when those situations arise. And then the third one, which is very important, so development opportunities. This, when we look at research, seems to be kind of the top thing in quiet quitting. So kind of employee skill training, career growth, having those opportunities, knowing where you're going, seeing the future, seeing that the organization is somehow with you again. So you can trust that they are there to help you develop in your career, for instance. And here I want to point out that we also know, as I said before, that people with leadership responsibility, managers themselves, are at a higher risk of quiet quitting. So in that sense, managerial training for their team and their needs to be able to respond to them, but also for themselves to have managerial maybe support, mentoring, coaching. This is what we do at Auntie with leaders and managers as well. So because the leadership position is many times very lonely, and as I said, many demands coming from all over the place. So a job that is very rewarding, but also kind of usually some sort of sparring is needed for managers in that sense. So just a small summary before we get into your comments. So remembering that open communication channels very important, creating that culture of taking feedback, fostering learning and development, of course, having organizational values and actions aligned, and then taking care of workload and work-life balance, communicating that as well, setting expectations and team principles for that as well. But thank you. Mindful of the time, we'll go into your questions and comments.
Thank you, Hanna-Kaisa. For the moment, we only have one comment in our chat, and I think you basically already answered this, but could you maybe elaborate already on more on a more personal level for these individuals. So what to do when faced with a company culture that encourages presenteeism. So maybe a quick recap on presenteeism and on a individual level.
Yes, well, that's very very kind of unfortunate if this is the case. So on an individual level, what to do. So I always, with my clients as well, if there's a feeling, a sense of this, that this is kind of what is happening. So of course, your manager is the first one, or HR is also something to talk about this. That what are the expectations here? And then, of course, in my client work, whatever the culture is, we have to look at individual values that you hold as an individual and what you think that is the right way of doing things, and setting boundaries then for yourself to kind of do things in a way that are aligned with your values. If the organizational culture, you can see that there is some distress in that sense, that the values are not your own. But kind of these type of things, of course, would hope that there would be open communication, that, hey, this is what I have noticed, and talking with your manager about it would be beneficial. And hopefully that would be something that they would be willing to talk about.
All right. Thank you for this very insightful topic and webinar, Hanna-Kaisa. I already posted the blog article that you've written about this topic also in the chat. So if you want to dig in deeper, do go and have a look at the chat. There's also a list of references for anyone who wants to go even deeper inside this topic. But that being said, this is our last one for this year. And of course, we will be sending a recording to everyone who has registered for this webinar. So you will get the recording link by email, so you can get back to the topic as often as you like. But hey, with that being said, thank you, Hanna-Kaisa, for this one. Thank you for everyone who attended. And we will see you again next year with another set of Auntie Open webinars. So see you then, and have a great rest of the week. Bye.
Thank you.